I was planning a romantic trip with my girlfriend and she wanted to take my brother with her. It was then that I realized that they had something more than friendship. I'm Alex, I'm 22, and for most of my life, I've tried to be the good older sibling, the understanding one, the one who keeps his head down and doesn't rock the boat. My younger brother, Trevor, is 18 now. He was adopted into our family when he was 5 years old. I still remember that day clearly, how excited my parents were, how the house was spotless, how they told me to be extra gentle and not to ask too many questions. At the time, I didn't fully grasp what it meant, only that suddenly I had a little brother who didn't talk much and flinched at loud noises. Trevor came from a rough background. I won't go into all the details because they're not mine to tell, but let's just say he didn't have an easy start in life. And I get it, I really do. My parents saw that and decided to give him the stability he never had. They gave him everything. And I mean everything. From the very beginning, it felt like they wrapped him in this invisible bubble made of worry and guilt and overcompensation. He had meltdowns, they gave him space. He had bad days at school, they blamed the teachers. If he didn't want to do chores, they didn't push it. If he said something cruel or out of line, they chalked it up to trauma and told me to be patient, to be more mature, to remember how hard things were for him before he came to us. I tried. God, I tried. I swallowed every bit of jealousy that came up when they skipped my basketball tournament to take him to therapy. I bit my tongue when they canceled my birthday dinner because he wasn't in the mood for crowds. I told myself it wasn't his fault, that he needed them more than I did, that I was strong enough to deal with a little neglect because at least I didn't come into the world broken. But that doesn't mean it didn't hurt. That doesn't mean I didn't notice the way they lit up when he smiled, the way they bent over backwards to make sure he was comfortable, even if that meant I got left behind. It wasn't one big moment that broke me, it was years of little ones. Being the afterthought. Being told I was so good for understanding, for not making things harder. The truth was, they never gave me permission to be anything but okay. There was no room for me to be upset or angry or even confused. I was the one who had to adjust, always. I told myself that one day things would balance out. That maybe once Trevor got older, more stable, they'd finally start seeing me again. That maybe they'd stop treating him like a glass statue and start treating me like a son who needed his parents too. But that's not how it worked. And eventually, something had to give. Everything was easier for Trevor. It didn't matter how old we got or how much time had passed since he joined our family. My parents never stopped cushioning his world, never stopped smoothing every bump in his road while mine was full of potholes. I remember when I wanted a laptop for college. I spent the entire summer working double shifts at a local cafe, saving every tip and every spare dollar just to afford a decent one. It wasn't top of the line, but it was mine. I was proud of it. Meanwhile, Trevor didn't have to lift a finger. The moment he mentioned his laptop was laggy, our parents had a brand new one delivered to him the next week. High-spec, sleek with all the upgrades. No discussion, no hesitation. When it came time to move out for university, the difference only grew starker. My parents paid Trevor's rent in full, no questions asked. He got a cozy one-bedroom apartment close to campus, fully furnished with a care package from mom and dad waiting on the counter when he moved in. I, on the other hand, was told that learning to budget and share space was character building, and ended up with a random roommate in a stuffy dorm that smelled like old socks and microwaved noodles. My room barely had enough space for a bed and a desk, and yet my parents acted like it was a rite of passage, something I should be grateful for. Even now, while he's legally an adult and fully enrolled in university, our mom still schedules all his doctor's appointments. She calls to remind him to take his vitamins, fills out his forms, handles his prescriptions. He once forgot to pick up a refill and she drove 2 hours to deliver it to him. I haven't had her help with anything medical since I turned 16. When I was sick on campus with the flu, all I got was a text telling me to drink fluids and rest if I could. I don't begrudge Trevor for the care he receives, not really. I know his past left marks that can't be seen on the surface. But it's hard not to feel like I've spent the last decade proving my strength just so they'd feel okay ignoring my needs. Like the better I behaved, the less I was seen. Trevor got their tenderness, their constant attention, their instinct to protect. And me? I got independence wrapped in silence. I've been with Amber for 3 years now. She's 21 and everything about her feels like sunlight. She's sweet without being naive, witty in a way that keeps me on my toes, and beautiful in a way that doesn't even seem to try. From the very beginning, being with her just made sense. There was no forced small talk, no awkward figuring it out phase. We clicked like we had always known each other in some other lifetime. We met during a group project at university, and what started as late-night study sessions turned into morning coffees, inside jokes, and the kind of quiet comfort you don't expect to find when you're still this young. We had become each other's constants. She knew how I took my coffee, what songs made me cry, which stories from my childhood I hated telling. I knew how she organized her bookshelf by color, how she talked to her cat like it was a person, how she bit the inside of her cheek when she was nervous. We built this little world between us, one made of texts at 3 a.m., long walks through bookstores, and whispered dreams of what our life could look like 5, 10, even 20 years down the line. We had started seriously talking about our future. Not just in that daydreamy wouldn't it be nice kind of way, but with actual plans. We talked about moving in together after graduation, about saving up for a place with lots of windows and room for a dog. Marriage had come up too, not in some over-the-top ring-on-the-spot kind of way, but in the way where you start saying, when we're married, instead of, if. Every conversation felt like a thread pulling us closer together. Every plan, every joke, every lazy Sunday wrapped up in each other, felt so real it was hard to imagine anything could come between us. When Trevor started at my university, I tried to be the kind of older brother I always wished I'd had. Despite everything, the uneven treatment, the unspoken favoritism, I wanted him to have a good start. So when it came time to choose his classes, I offered to help. I sat down with him in the living room over coffee, opened my laptop and pulled up the course catalog. We went over the general education requirements, the electives that might interest him, and the professors I knew from my own experience. It felt good, in a way, to be useful to him, to guide him through the chaos of first-year registration instead of letting him stumble through it alone. In trying to make things easier, I made a choice I thought was smart at the time. I enrolled him in 2 of the same classes I knew Amber was taking that semester. It wasn't some grand scheme, just a practical, well-intentioned move. I figured it would help him feel less alone, to have at least one familiar face in the room. Plus, I thought it would be a great way for the 3 of us to spend time together on campus, maybe grab lunch after class or walk back to the dorms. Amber already knew Trevor in that casual, met him at family dinner kind of way, and I thought having them in the same classes might make things smoother for everyone. Part of me also wanted to be able to help him with his assignments, to be involved in his transition to university life in a way my parents never were for me. I remembered how isolating it felt to arrive on campus that first year, overwhelmed and underprepared, and I didn't want him to go through that. So I made the schedules align where I could. I told Amber, she smiled and said it was sweet, and Trevor just shrugged like it didn't matter much to him either way. It all felt harmless, even thoughtful. But looking back now, I realize how much I underestimated what that decision would set in motion. At first glance, everything was fine. I saw them together after class, walking out of the lecture hall or sitting under the big oak tree near the quad, and it looked exactly like I'd hoped it would, friendly, easy, comfortable. They joked around a lot, Amber teasing him the way she always did with people she liked, Trevor throwing sarcastic comments right back at her, both of them laughing more often than not. It was nice, I told myself. It meant the plan had worked. He had someone familiar to ease the nerves of those first few weeks, and I didn't have to worry about him sitting alone or feeling lost. But then something started to shift. It was subtle at first. Amber started quoting his jokes when we were alone, bringing up things he'd said in class and laughing harder than I thought the stories deserved. She started talking about him more, in that offhand way where you mention someone just a little too often, where their name is always at the edge of a new sentence. I noticed how her eyes lit up when he entered her room, how she smiled differently around him. Not fake or flirty exactly, but more electric. Familiar in a way I couldn't quite explain. Trevor, too, had changed around her. He had always been a little awkward with people, but with Amber, there was a confidence that surprised me. He leaned in when she talked, nudged her arm when he made a joke, looked at her like he was waiting for a reaction, and she always gave him one. He didn't flirt the way other guys did. He wasn't obvious about it. But there was something about the way he carried himself when she was around, the way his voice softened, the way he hovered just a bit too close. I tried to brush it off at first. I told myself I was being paranoid, possessive, reading too much into something harmless. But every time I watched them together, that feeling in my gut twisted tighter. It wasn't jealousy exactly, not yet, but it was something. A quiet, creeping unease that I couldn't shake, like I was standing outside my own life, watching something shift beneath the surface and not knowing how or when it would finally break through. Once, in a restaurant, she gave him a taste of her dish straight from her spoon. We were sitting at a small table by the window, just the 3 of us, celebrating the end of midterms with burgers and milkshakes and that warm, casual energy that usually comes when stress lifts off your shoulders. Amber had ordered something new, some kind of spicy pasta, and when it arrived she took a bite, her eyes lit up, and she immediately turned to Trevor with a grin and said, "You have to try this." Before I could even react, she scooped up another bite and held the spoon out to him, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Trevor, without hesitation, reached out and gently took her wrist, guiding the spoon to his mouth with a smile that made my stomach twist. Everyone laughed, Amber giggling, Trevor doing this dramatic wow reaction, and even a table nearby chuckling at their playful scene. But I didn't laugh. I couldn't. It was like everything slowed down for a second, and all I could do was stare at the two of them while something inside me crumpled. It wasn't just the spoon. It was the way he touched her, the ease between them, the familiarity that felt like it didn't belong to me anymore. That tiny moment, that flash of something so small and seemingly innocent, hit me with more force than any argument or betrayal ever could. It felt like I had been struck in the heart, like I was sitting there smiling through a dinner where I was no longer the person she leaned toward, laughed with, looked at like that. And the worst part was they didn't even notice. To them it was a joke, a casual moment. But to me it felt like the start of something I couldn't stop. Another time, when we were hanging out on campus after a long afternoon of studying, Amber handed her phone to Trevor and asked him to take a picture of the two of us. It was something we did often, capturing little moments to remember what had started to feel like the golden parts of our relationship. Quiet smiles, casual cuddles, snapshots of our lives tangled together. I wrapped my arm around her and waited while Trevor held up the phone, but instead of pointing it at us, he turned it around, snapped a picture of himself with Amber tucked against his side, his arm around her waist like it was nothing unusual. And the part that burned the most was that she let him. I stood there, stunned, trying to laugh it off like it was just another one of Trevor's weird jokes, but it didn't feel like a joke. Not anymore. Amber took her phone back, grinned at the picture, and didn't say a word about the one she was supposed to post. The one of me and her, the couple, the people who were supposed to be making memories together. Later that night, when I checked her profile out of habit, I saw it. The photo of her and Trevor, the one where they looked like something more than friends, captioned with a flirty science buddy's red heart, like it was some cute inside thing only the two of them understood. Ours wasn't there. She never posted it. And even though she didn't say anything cruel, even though she probably thought it didn't matter, I felt the weight of that missing photo like a hand squeezing my chest. In a single post, she'd erased me from the moment and marked something else, something I didn't want to name, with a heart and a smile for the whole world to see. I've noticed her changing. It didn't happen all at once. It crept in slowly, like a shift in the weather you can't quite name until the storm's already overhead. She started texting me less. Our conversations, once constant and full of warmth, turned into brief replies, scattered emojis, messages that felt more like obligations than excitement. At first, I told myself she was just busy, that school was draining her, that things would go back to normal soon. But then I noticed how often she was talking to Trevor. I'd catch little glimpses, her laughing at something on her phone, turning it away when I leaned over, or smiling down at her screen in that soft way I used to think was just for me. They had their own jokes now, little nicknames I didn't understand, references that flew over my head. They started sharing music too, sending each other songs with meanings that weren't meant for me. I found out they had a playlist, one they made together for study sessions, they said, but the song titles, the lyrics, the way she smiled when one came on in the car, it didn't feel academic. It felt personal, intimate, like something sacred between them. She started praising him more often too. Little compliments dropped into conversation like stones into still water. She called him brilliant when he answered a tough question in class, said he had this quiet confidence that made people listen. And one night, when we were with a group of friends, I overheard her laughing and telling one of them, "He's got muscles and brains, what more could you want?" She didn't even notice the way my stomach dropped or how I went quiet for the rest of the night. That used to be how she talked about me. I used to be the one she bragged about, the one who made her light up when she spoke. Now, all of that seemed to be slipping toward him, slowly and shamelessly, and I didn't know how to stop it, or if I even could. The culmination was a trip to a lake town in Wisconsin. It was something I had planned for weeks, a quiet weekend getaway just for the two of us, something romantic, something real. I had picked the cabin myself, a cozy little place near the water with a fireplace and a view of the pines. I thought it would be a reset, a reminder of everything we meant to each other before the distance, the inside jokes I wasn't part of. The growing silence between us started to take root. I had imagined long walks by the lake, shared breakfasts on the porch, maybe even talking about the next steps in our relationship, moving in, graduation, the future. So when she smiled at me over dinner and said almost casually, "What if we brought Trevor with us?" I felt the air go out of the room. I blinked, confused, thinking maybe she meant as part of a group, like a last-minute double date sort of thing. But no, there were no other friends. Just him. She even laughed and said, "It'd be fun, he needs to get out of the city for a bit." As if that was reason enough to invite my brother on what was supposed to be a romantic escape for us. I sat there stunned, staring at her, wondering how she didn't see how wrong it was. This wasn't some casual road trip or group hike. This was a trip meant for connection, for intimacy, for quiet moments we hadn't had in so long. And she wanted to bring him. Not because he had nowhere else to go, not because it was some obligation, but because she wanted him there. Because she thought his presence would somehow improve a weekend that was supposed to be about us. I didn't even argue. I just nodded slowly, my appetite gone, the pit in my stomach growing heavier by the second. It wasn't just about the trip. It was about everything that had led to this moment. And in that instant, I realized that whatever we had been building, whatever future we had imagined, was already slipping through my fingers. I couldn't stand it. For the first time in 3 years, I broke down. Everything I had tried to bottle up, every moment I had swallowed my discomfort and forced a smile, every quiet doubt that had clawed at me since the day I saw her light up at one of his jokes, it all came flooding out. We were in my apartment, the lights low, the TV still playing some movie neither of us had been watching. I turned to her, my voice shaking, and I said I needed to talk. And then I just let it go. I told her how I felt like a third wheel in my own relationship, how slowly but surely, she had drifted away from me and into something I couldn't quite define with Trevor. I told her about the photo, the spoon, the way her face changed when she looked at him, the songs they shared, the way she touched his arm like it meant something. I told her how much it hurt to feel replaced, not by some stranger or some ex, but by my own brother. My little brother, who I had helped, supported, welcomed into my world. I told her I had tried so hard to be understanding, to believe it was all innocent, that it was just a weird coincidence or that I was imagining things. But I wasn't imagining how it felt to be slowly pushed to the edge while they pulled closer in the center. I asked her, voice breaking, if she had feelings for him. I asked it plain, raw, terrified of the answer but more terrified to keep pretending I didn't already know. She didn't answer right away. She just stared at me, wide-eyed and quiet, and in that silence I felt something in my chest finally crack. Because even if she said no, even if she denied it with words, everything else, the hesitation, the shift in her eyes, the way she didn't rush to reassure me, had already told me the truth. She denied everything. Her face didn't change much when I asked the question. No shock, no guilt, just this tired sort of exasperation like I was being unreasonable for even thinking it. She told me I was being paranoid, that I was reading too much into harmless things, that she was just trying to be kind to my brother because he didn't have many friends yet. She said she treated him like a sibling, that the spoon, the photo, the playlist, it was all innocent. Platonic. And maybe if she had said it with even a flicker of understanding, if she had acknowledged for 1 second how all of it might have looked from where I stood, I could have tried to believe her. I could have tried to give her the benefit of the doubt one last time. But she didn't. She was calm, too calm, like none of this mattered, like I was the one unraveling something that had never been whole to begin with. And I couldn't swallow it anymore. I couldn't keep sitting in silence while she brushed away my hurt like dust off her sleeve. I had carried this weight alone for too long, tried to be rational and reasonable while everything inside me screamed. So when she finished with her practiced words and empty reassurances, I stood up. I told her I wasn't going on that trip. That I couldn't pretend any longer that this was something it wasn't. I left before she could try to pull me back with more softness that didn't feel real anymore. I walked out into the cold night with no clear plan, no grand speech, just the overwhelming need to escape before I completely lost myself. Because the truth was, even if nothing physical had happened between them, something I could feel every time she looked at him the way she used to look at me. And I couldn't sit there and let it keep happening while she told me I was imagining it. I owed myself more than that. I blocked Trevor and ignored Amber. The moment I walked out that night, I knew I couldn't handle any more of their words, their explanations, or their insistence that everything was fine. My phone buzzed nonstop for the next few days, texts, missed calls, voicemails from both of them. Trevor's messages started off casual, like he didn't understand why I was upset, asking if I was okay, telling me to talk to him. But the longer I stayed silent, the more urgent his messages became. Amber's were different, longer, more emotional, asking me to please talk to her, to let her explain again, to at least meet her face to face. But I couldn't. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, not when everything it might say would only sink deeper into the place that already felt hollow. On campus, I started walking different routes, avoiding buildings and corners where I might run into her. Once, I saw her across the quad, her hair catching in the wind the way it always used to when we'd meet for coffee between classes, and I turned around so fast I nearly bumped into someone. I ducked into a bathroom and sat in the stall for 10 minutes, breathing like I'd just run a mile. Another time, I spotted Trevor outside the library laughing with someone else, completely at ease, and I crossed the street just to put distance between us. I didn't want confrontation. I didn't want closure. I just wanted space to breathe. But with the space came shame. Not just over what they'd done, or what they might not have done, but over how I had reacted. I hated the explosion, the way I'd broken down and let every buried thing rise to the surface in a rush of emotion I couldn't control. I hated the jealousy, the feeling of being so easily replaced, of watching something that had meant everything to me slip into someone else's hands. And most of all, I hated the silence. I had always been the one to keep the peace, to explain, to forgive. But now I was the one who vanished, who shut doors without warning, who disappeared without a final word. And yet, in that silence, in all that shame and pain, there was also something else: relief. Because as much as it hurt, I knew deep down I had finally drawn a line. And even though I didn't know what came next, I knew I couldn't go back. Not to her, not to him, and not to the version of myself that kept pretending everything was okay when it wasn't. A week later, after enough time had passed for the initial sting to dull into something more bearable, I agreed to talk to Trevor. He had been persistent, reaching out almost every day, leaving voicemails where he sounded more confused than angry, like he was walking through a situation he didn't fully understand. We met at a small cafe near campus, the kind of place where no one really made eye contact and the music played just loud enough to make things feel less raw. He looked tired, a little thinner, like the tension had weighed on him too. He didn't waste time with small talk. He looked me in the eye and told me, honestly, that he had no feelings for Amber, that he never saw her as anything more than someone he got along with because she mattered to me. He said he thought I had wanted him on the trip, that when Amber brought it up, he assumed it had been my idea all along. I listened, my arms crossed, the bitterness still lingering but softened just enough to let his words reach me. I didn't fully believe him, not yet, but I wanted to. Then I showed him the text messages. I had gone through them before the meeting, screenshot a few just in case I lost my nerve. They weren't explicit, nothing you could point to and say, "Here, this is where it crossed the line." But taken as a whole, the tone, the frequency, the little inside jokes and late-night song links, they didn't feel like brotherly banter. They felt like something more. And I told him that. I told him that even if he didn't feel it, even if he didn't mean it, there was an intimacy between them that went beyond what I was ever okay with. He stared at the screen, scrolling through the messages slowly, his face unreadable. Then he sighed and said, "I didn't realize it came across like that." He looked genuinely shaken, and for the first time I believed he might not have seen it, at least not fully. Maybe to him, it had all just been attention, affirmation, a way to feel close to someone during a lonely start to college. But to me it had chipped away at something sacred. He apologized, not just for the messages but for making me feel replaced, for being blind to what I was going through. And even though it didn't fix everything, it was something. It was the first real piece of truth I'd gotten since everything fell apart. After that, I talked to Amber. It wasn't easy agreeing to see her after everything, but something about my conversation with Trevor left me with more questions than answers. If nothing else, I needed to hear her side, to see her face when she said the things I wasn't sure I could believe from a screen. We met in the park, the one we used to walk through at sunset when we still talked about forever like it was guaranteed. She looked nervous, like she knew I wasn't there for comfort or closure, but for the truth. I asked her about the gym visits, about the nights Trevor mentioned stopping by her apartment for drinks after class, about the times he said they studied late and she let him crash on the couch. She blinked, surprised, then shook her head slowly and said none of that ever happened. She said she never invited him to her gym, never once had him over for drinks, and that if he ever hinted otherwise, it was either a misunderstanding or an outright lie. Her voice was steady, but something about her answers felt too polished, too measured. She said she barely talked to Trevor outside of class anymore, that she'd only been trying to make him feel welcome, that I had blown it out of proportion because I was insecure. But the thing was, Trevor had told me about those hangouts in detail, dates, times, what they talked about, what drinks they had. It hadn't felt like boasting. It had felt like casual, honest recollection, like he didn't think there was anything to hide. Their stories didn't match. Not even close. And sitting there on that bench, hearing Amber deny every bit of it, I didn't know who to believe anymore. Maybe they were both lying. Maybe one of them was telling the truth. Or maybe, just maybe, they had each rewritten their own versions of the same story, one to avoid blame, the other to avoid guilt, and I was the only one left trying to make sense of the pieces. Amber and I decided to take a break. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors, just a quiet conversation at dusk where the words hung heavy between us, weighted by everything we couldn't untangle. I told her I needed space to figure things out, that I didn't know what to believe anymore, that somewhere along the way I had stopped recognizing the version of us we were trying to hold on to. she cried, wiping her face with the sleeve of her hoodie, and asked if this meant we were done for good. I told her I didn't know. I just knew I couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay when I was unraveling from the inside. She didn't argue. She nodded reluctantly and said she understood, even if it hurt. We didn't hug goodbye. We didn't promise to check in. We just stood there for a moment, both of us silent, both of us staring at the place where the sky faded into the horizon, and then we turned and walked away in opposite directions. And now, I'm left with 1,000 questions I can't seem to answer. Did I overreact, or did I ignore the truth for too long? Did she lie to protect herself, or had I been right to trust my gut all along? Was Trevor just caught in the middle, or was he more involved than he let on? I don't know. Maybe I won't know for a long time. But I do know that something inside me shifted, that I'm tired of feeling like an afterthought in my own life, of carrying the weight of silence while trying to protect everyone else's feelings but my own. I don't know what's next. I don't know where Amber and I stand, or if we'll find our way back to each other, or if we're meant to go our separate ways for good. But I hope that, whatever comes of this, I can come out of it stronger. That maybe, in losing what I thought I needed, I'll finally figure out what I truly deserve.